got people continuing to join, which is great. So welcome everyone. It's great to see you all here for another monthly environment session. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognising their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. And we pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So we've got a really great session once again this month today. So in a moment we'll hear from David Dorrell, and then after that we'll ask some questions, and then we'll hear from Lisa McMurray. Lisa, David's the CEO of the airline business, which I'll Dovetail Electric Aviation, which I'll introduce in a minute, and then Lisa is the Learning and Program Development Manager at Aboriginal Carbon Foundation. Okay, so tonight's topic, I suppose, the first part with David is around the state of electric aviation now and looking into the future, hydrogen versus hybrid. So I'll introduce David. David is the co-founder and CEO of Dovetail Electric Aviation, and their aim is to enable aviation operators to fly commercially viable regional routes in nil-emission electric-powered aircraft. And interestingly, this technology is being developed and integrated here in Australia with the goal of exporting it to the rest of the world. And David's very much at the forefront of developing, certifying and distributing electric-powered nil-emission propulsion systems for existing aircraft. In other words, converting legacy aircraft into electric aircraft. Their headquarters and directors are based in Australia, but they've also got key personnel, customers and R&D being undertaken in Europe. And prior to this, David has had a long and varied career in industry and engineering, and it's included roles with Boeing and Airbus. So David, thank you so much for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you for having me. Yes, just a quick question. Just remind me, how much time do I have to go over my presentation?
If you want to chat for like 20-25 minutes, does that sound good?
Okay.
And then we'll go for questions for sort of 10 or 15. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I had a long presentation, so I'll try to jump over a few slides. So just allow me to do that. So well, first of all, let me just share my screen. Let me see. Okay, so hopefully you should see my screen, and I'll put it in presentation mode. So let's see if I can.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. So well, thanks again, for having me today at your session. So I'm the CEO and founder of Electric Aviation, as Stephen mentioned, aerospace engineer by background. I guess all my life in the industry in a few different places. I'm originally from Spain, but also an Australian citizen. I've spent most of the last 20 years in Australia, but also in other places, and definitely driving electric aviation in the last few years. So just to tell you where this is coming from, right? And what we've seen is that in the last 20 years, since the last 90s, there has been what we call the small aircraft segment has been dying. And what that means is that only in Australia, almost 100 airlines have disappeared. So what you can see on the right are many routes, and they're just an example, that were direct routes, like in some cases as recently as 3 years ago, in some cases 15 years ago. So what we can say is that the country, and I would say that this is applicable to other parts of the world, and definitely the US too. And we'll mention the US, but the country is definitely more poorly connected than it used to be 20 years ago. So as I said before, all those routes were possible. Those flights, direct flights, were possible not long ago, in some cases longer ago. And now, if you want to go between those places, either you have to stop over in one of the big cities, or you need to drive for many hours. And as I said, many because of all those airlines have disappeared, those routes are not possible. And it's unfortunate because a great, big, and wealthy country like Australia is seeing population being concentrated in a handful of cities, right? And I think that is driving inequality and slowing down progress from a social and economic point of view. And the role that air transport is playing is diminished, and that's because maintaining, operating a small aircraft is really expensive, and actually is getting worse. And the future adoption of sustainable aviation fuel, something that will happen if we take climate change seriously, is going to make things even worse because the price of sustainable aviation fuels can be 3 up to 5 times the price of conventional kerosene. And you can imagine that if there are a number of routes, many routes are not viable, if you increase the price of fuel, it's going to be even worse. Just to give you an idea of what we're planning to do and what this means for the economy, this is just a statistics or just an indication of the percentage of the population. This is applicable to the US, but something similar we believe should be applicable to Australia. This is what these graphs illustrate is the percentage of the population that live within, in this case, 15 minutes of a regional airport. So this is saying that 40% of the population lives within 15 minutes of a regional airport, and up to 90% live within 30 minutes of a regional airport. So what this means is that basically almost or most of the country is within half an hour of a regional airport. So if we increased connectivity, or we increased flights to those regional airports by 20%, there will be a massive improvement in connectivity of the overall population. And again, as I said before, that is definitely applicable to Australia. Now the question is how we can do that, right? Given what I just said, but that's what I'll move into next, right? So and also something interesting is that most of in the States, most of the regional cargo routes under 400 kilometers, under 400 miles are done with a small aircraft, right? So that's also gives you the potential, or an idea about the potential of regional mobility and the potential of improving the efficiency, the economics, but also the emissions, right, of aircraft within these categories, and what would be the positive impact, not only from an air transport point of view of people, but also cargo. This is and what I'm trying to do is to set up the basis of what we're doing and where this is coming from. But these are all studies done by McKinsey, and what they're suggesting is that what we call regional air mobility, that is air transport under 800 kilometers, like the 400 or 500 miles and 50 passengers. The demand for a small aircraft capable of doing that could be reaching 36,000 aircraft by mid next decade. And this is because regional air mobility, and when we're talking about regional air mobility, I talk mostly about electric aviation that has the capability of reducing operating costs. So if you can do that, then the impact that will have in the economies of countries like Australia or the US will be significant, more at the or definitely at the passenger cargo point of view, at the passenger and cargo point of view, and with that we'll see that level of demand, and that's something that we're definitely contributing to. But interestingly, what we're seeing is that electric aviation nowadays is mostly driven by what we call urban air mobility. And urban air mobility, or electric vertical takeoff and landing, is what some people call it flying taxis. So basically multi-rotors, small aircraft that take off and land vertically. But the problem is that they significantly expensive compared to what we call conventional aircraft. And they're capable of flying or landing on basically any spot, but the economics of that are not proven. And actually we're talking about a segment that is not really proven as a viable economic product, right? But interestingly, what we're seeing is that billions have been poured in the last few years in those new companies. Most of what you see here are orders of those vehicles that still yet to be proven. And we're talking again about billions of dollars have been poured into those new companies. And what we believe, and actually what we're starting to see is that some of those companies are starting to fail. In Europe, actually, Lilium and Volocopter basically are disappearing, and a few others in other parts of the world. And what we believe is that what we call the conventional takeoff and landing aircraft, so basically fixed wing aircraft, are the ones that can actually drive the potential or can materialize the potential electric aviation. These are just a few examples, but that is probably what makes us different, between what companies like this are doing. And again, these are not the ones that are driving the multi-billion-dollar investments from VCs across the globe. These are relatively conventional aircraft. Is the flying taxis or the eVTOL the ones that are doing that? But what we believe is that this is definitely better than eVTOL. But what we believe is that there are other aircraft, or that there are other opportunities to even bring electrification to market even much faster, right? And that's the reason, or that is how we created DOT Electric Aviation. So what we realized was that electrification can actually alter that. I mentioned that the country is more poorly connected, and that is because, again, the cost of a small aircraft, of maintaining and operating a small aircraft, is really high. So one of the beauties of electrification is that it's not only capable of reducing emissions or eliminating emissions, it can reduce significantly operating costs, to the point that all those routes that have disappeared in the last 30 years will be viable again, and even many more. And that's our strategy, and our vision is to do that. But in order to do it as quickly as we can, and rather than waiting 10 years to make that possible, what we're saying is, look, let's try to make that happen before the end of the decade. How? Well, first, we're focusing on powering with batteries only very short flights, and that alone can reduce operating costs by 50%. And again, having a significant impact on the economical viability of those short flights. For that, we're developing key technology building blocks, particularly electric propulsion, batteries, and then the integration with range extenders, and do that to retrofit existing aircraft into electric. So basically retrofitting, converting legacy aircraft so that small operators, rather than having to invest in new capex, they can make the best of their existing assets. No need to writing them off, and yet, for a slightly higher incremental investment over maintaining their existing aircraft, they can go into electric. And with that idea, basically, DOT Electric Aviation was born. And that's our plan to bring electric conversions to market. Just in a nutshell, for you to see, these are our technology strategy is based on three fundamental pillars. One is the development of battery systems, proprietary battery systems, and we are bringing to market the first aviation immersion battery. So what that means, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, is a very compact system that is capable of fit into very confined spaces, significantly high amounts of energy, apart from very, very light, using high energy cells, right? We're also developing our own electric propulsion system, and a proprietary integration with what we call range extension. By the way, with range extenders, we consider here two options. One, hydrogen fuel cells that we've already tested, and turbo generators. A turbo generator is basically a turbine that generates electricity. Lately, we're moving a little bit towards that, simply because hydrogen is going to take much longer to get certified, get approved by regulators, but also because the supply chain for hydrogen, particularly for liquid hydrogen, doesn't exist, and it's going to take really long to get there. So that's why we said, look, hydrogen is going to be part of the picture. We believe that it's going to be part of the solution. But I think that we believe that it's going to take probably 10, 15, 20 years. Actually, 10 years probably will be a short period of time. So that's why we moved towards the turbo generator side of things. But again, that is another fundamental pillar so that we can fly longer distances, because batteries only are good for 15, 20, 25-minute flights. But flying longer than that, yeah, is really challenging unless, again, you introduce something that can pack more energy than a battery can do. And the battery technology is going to improve, but we're not going to see miracles in the next 10 or 15 years. Just so that you can visualize what we're talking about. These are the different technologies that we're developing. Our electric motor with what we call pitch control unit, that's provided by our supplier, Hardshell, developer of propellers. Then power distribution unit, all our power electronics, all of this is developed and built in-house, and Dopak, what we call our immersion battery system, that again, we give it that name, right? So just a few more details about the different technologies. So Dopak is a modular stackable system. We've passed the stringent thermal runaway tests, and I'll show you a little bit more about that in a second. Again, what makes it special is that is the only immersion battery technology for aviation. Immersion because the cells are actually in direct contact with the electric fluid, and that makes it really efficient from a thermal management point of view, to the point that we believe is the most compact system in the market. And it uses cylindrical cells 21700. So those are conventional cells from that are used also for automotive. Our propulsion system, you saw that in action a little bit before in that video, and important part is the integration with the range extender. And a range extender, as I mentioned before, there are two options: hydrogen and turbo generator. So we're working on a turbo generator from a third party, and actually we're working with Honda. That basically it generates electricity on board so that we can fly longer distances. And the beauty of this is that if you add range extended, that's when you can actually fly distances that are equivalent to any commercial flight today, right? Particularly when we're talking about a small aircraft. We're talking about more than 1,000 kilometers, up to 1,000 kilos of payload. That is eight passengers, and these aircraft are certified to carry not much more than that, 9 or 10 passengers. So basically, we're replicating the capability of the conventional technology with the range extender, but with direct operating costs significantly lower, up to 50%, and reduction of CO2, from 30 to 100%. And it's 100% only if you fly very short distances. If you fly using the range extender, obviously you will be emitting some CO2, and again with significantly also lower noise. All of these will be able to do it in 1/3 of the time and 1/10 of the cost. And that is a key differentiator with the developers of brand new platforms. That obviously it will have also the role in the industry, but when we believe that we need to make an impact in years rather than in decades, and that's the reason why we've chosen this path. Just to illustrate what we're talking about. So on the left, we're showing the test of our thermal runaway tests. So the results of our thermal runaway tests. So what does it mean? We actually artificially will force one of those cells to go on fire. And our system, what it needs to do is to stop and avoid propagation. This cell is surrounded by active cells. So what that means is that unless you do something, usually the other cells get on fire, and then the whole thing becomes like a bomb. So thanks to our technology, we've managed to stop that. And just some examples of our electric motor running and our range extender. Although in this case we were using hydrogen, right? with that, we've managed to reduce up to 40% and higher the operating costs of these platforms. And just to illustrate the impact of this is the result of a study by NASA called Revitalization of the Short-Haul Aviation Industry. And what this study suggested was that if you manage to reduce operating costs by up to 40%, the number of economically viable routes multiply by a factor of 10. So basically, you manage to address the lack of connectivity that we mentioned before, and then you manage to get a country way better connected, and many places, small towns that nowadays, particularly in Australia, are hard to reach, become way more livable, so to speak. So we've done a little bit of a modeling, and this is actually what could happen. If we, for instance, we start this is actually a real life example, because Rex Airlines, that by the way is one of our investors, came from the integration of a couple of former airlines or previous airlines. One of them was Asselton, that started, I think, in Coodle, a little airport from Orange. So, and they started just flying short distances between Sydney and Canberra. So our technology actually would follow a similar approach to their expansion plans back in the day, and that is because of our ability to reduce the operating costs, what we'll be doing is multiplying by a factor of 5, by a factor of 10 the viable routes, and in the end, what we'll be getting is what we call the small hub multiplier effect. That is, you start expanding your routes with little hubs, little cities, little towns like Lismore, like Davo, like Mildura, and then you can fly to other smaller towns in a radius of 500, 700 kilometers. And what that means is that you manage to again reconnect the country. So that is, the significant positive impact that electric aviation can bring to Australia in particular, apart from reducing emissions that on its own right is a significant positive impact, right? But again, it's not only about that we would argue that it could be good enough, but it's also about improving the connectivity of the country. Other examples, right? I like this one on the right, because there was some news recently. There's a Griffith Sydney direct flight, but I think it's operated. I don't know if it's Jetstar or Qantas, but right now is cheaper to fly to Fiji than flying between Griffith and Sydney, right? And that's because again these aircraft tend to be relatively expensive to operate, right? So the alternative are, and there was again some news saying that a return flight between Griffith and Sydney costed like $1,300. So either you pay that money, you have to go to the doctor or something like that, or else you need to drive for 6 hours. So that's a proof in my mind that the country needs to do some, or we need to do something to better connect the country. We believe that there's a massive market, right? We've estimated that in 20,000 aircraft. I showed before some statistics from McKinsey suggesting that we're talking about 30,000 aircraft needed in this category in the next 10 years. And the way that we're approaching this is initially starting with what we call leisure applications, very short flights for scenic flights, skydiving, island hopping. Then moving into what we call special services, air ambulance, the likes of Royal Flying Doctors and similar cargo and special missions, sometimes defense, and then moving into airlines, right? I'll probably move quickly over this, but this is our product development roadmap with the this is how we're sizing the market initially with that primary market of very short flights, scenic flights, skydiving, and island hopping initially $1 billion, and then something that we've sized in $80 billion when we move towards longer flights. Just visually, a little bit about that roadmap. We're planning to do our first flight next year with that Cessna Caravan, the aircraft that you see there, and also a picture of the actual aircraft later. And then we'll move into the Beechcraft King Air, our first twin-engine hybrid platform, and then initially with the special missions, and then a similar version of that aircraft for airlines, right? Visually, yeah, that's what I refer to leisure applications, scenic flights, and this picture, the one at the top, definitely that is not Australia, that is Norway, where we have a few of our customers. But you have other definitely Australian cases like Dovetail Electric, like Sydney Seaplanes or Skydive Australia. So that would be the first step, the first way of adoption, and that's how we believe the market is going to behave. Then moving into what we call special services, so particularly air ambulance like Royal Flying Doctors, with which we're in contact, but also defense or law enforcement applications like surveillance, and that is all of these are the aircraft that were the same aircraft that we're gonna modify, the King Air, for all those different applications, and then moving eventually into more commercial uses of those platforms, particularly airlines, scheduled flights for these kind of routes, as I mentioned before, but also for cargo and for charter. And look, probably I wouldn't expand too much into our team, but we've been doing this now for a little while, and we're growing the team. As I mentioned before, the company started in Australia with my co-founder Aaron Shaw, that was one of the managing director and partners of Sydney Seaplanes, and we joined forces to create Dovetail Electric Aviation. Again, initially to focus on the integration of or the modification of existing aircraft into electric. A lot of pre-orders, what we call pre-orders. There's a significant interest from the Scandinavian countries, right? So several of these customers are actually in Norway. And that's interesting because Norway, the same way as they're introducing they're being really progressive and aggressive with the introduction of electric vehicles, and right now, by far, they sell way more electric cars in Norway than conventional cars. They're starting to drive something similar with electric aircraft, and we're planning to do first flights in Norway late next year. This is just simply tell you where we are, and look, one of the issues here is that. And what is one of the challenges that we're facing, particularly in Australia, is that we're deep tech, we are developing hardware, and it's difficult, right, to attract the interest of private investors in the country, right? Right now, the reality is that we're moving towards investment overseas, right? And it's a pity because we have a $5 million US raise structure with basically 80% ready. And so far, no investment whatsoever from any Australian entity, right? I would like to change that, right? We have a number of angel investors in the company so far already. So if anybody in the audience is interested, please let me know. So look, I won't go much longer, but just simply wanted to show the our latest progress. So what you can see here is we call it's a ground rig because it's attached to the ground, but it's an actual aircraft that we're using right now to test all the systems, right? To put this prototype in the air next year. We're going to be testing our motor. You can see it here, our power electronics, our inverter, but also the batteries that are inside the cabin. And we'll be doing intensive testing in the next few weeks to basically check that all the different components run and are capable of delivering the power under similar conditions to when we put it in the air. And we'll be delighted to show you more the results of our first flight next year when we put it in the air. As I said, because of all the traction and the support that we're getting overseas, although we're going to fly for sure in Australia, it looks like our first flight now is going to happen in Europe, in Spain and Norway. And we'll keep you posted if you want to hear from us. So that's in a nutshell what we're doing. More than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, David. That's fascinating and really, really good to see how that's all evolving and where it's all heading. So thank you. Got a couple of questions from myself and Carolyn, and then throw it open to any. So if you have any questions, just pop them in the chat and we'll cover those. In terms of the technology, David, is that being developed between Australia and Europe, or is it more one or the other? Or I suppose what sort of role is Australia playing in terms of that technology?
Look, the company started in Australia, right? The prime company is in Australia. We're an Australian company. We got some federal grant, CRCP grant in Australia. We started initially the company in Sydney. We were located to Melbourne because we got financial support from the Victorian government, and that's where the headquarters are. So until recently, most of the work was happening in Australia, and the battery technology, that is one of our key developments, is being developed mostly in Australia with our first prototypes built in Australia. Because of the European funding that we're getting, now we're doing more activities there, right? This ground rig that you see right now is being installed in the south of Spain. But our team is kind of half and half, right? Half the team is in Australia, half the team is in Spain. It is true that a year and a half ago, we were mostly in Australia. Now we're 50-50, so to speak. And that's what we envisage that, we're going to continue doing. The good thing is that Australia has a very interesting entry market. Australia relies on general aviation, on the kind of a small aircraft that we've been talking all this time. But the European Union is also driving sustainability. So there's a lot of interest and support. And although raising capital in Europe is not easy either, is a little bit less difficult than Europe. So what we anticipate is that we'll grow in both countries. And our industrial plan, requires that we set up conversion centers in both countries or in both continents, in Australia and Europe. So we'll be working hand in hand, even if it's a little bit. We're talking about two places really far from each other, but we'll be developing the company and the technology in both places in parallel.
Yeah, thank you. And are the big, aviation companies, are they taking an interest as well, or what's their sort of take on this?
Yeah, so we've been, as our approach is the modification of existing aircraft. We've discussed our technology with OEMs that are developing or that commercialize aircraft in this category. So Textron, that is the parent company of the Cessna Caravan, or all the Cessnas and the Beechcraft that are also retrofitting, or Pilatus, the Swiss company that develops the PC-12, another aircraft, for instance, operated by Royal Flying Doctors. So we had discussions with them, right? And these guys, I mean, they're large OEMs, aerospace companies, very well established, conservative, and I would say that they're sitting and waiting what we're doing, right? As we move forward and as we put our prototypes in the air and we move towards certification, they will grow their interest, right? And as I said, in some cases, we've had preliminary discussions about collaboration. They want us to see fly. And what we anticipate is that, the moment that we start putting this aircraft in the air and definitely in the market, they will, by then they will get nervous and they will accelerate. And actually, I wouldn't exclude the possibility of trying to acquire us when the time comes.
Yeah. Okay, great. Now I've got some questions coming in here. Jeff asks, what is the recharging time or process? Will batteries be charged whilst they're fitted on board? Or are you looking at swapping out battery installations?
Yeah, that's a good question. The initial approach is to charge them, right? The charging time is 1.5 the flight time. So, for instance, if you fly for 20 minutes, you need to recharge for 30. That is okay, for these short flights, right? For the hybrid version, as the batteries won't be operating all the time, it won't be a long recharging time either. But it is true that for the high utilization aircraft, sometimes 30 minutes of charge may not be suitable or ideal. We're also looking at a swappable version of the system, of the battery system. The problem is that is a little bit more complex, a little bit heavier. And the initial discussions with some operators suggest, look, worth doing like 4, 5, 6 flights a day, short flights. We can time them so that between flight and flight, there could be an hour or 40 minutes, and that would be more than enough to charge them. So we're initially following that approach. But again, the swappable battery is definitely another concept that we're looking into.
Yeah, fantastic. And then another question here: will the batteries also be able to be used in areas other than aviation, e.g., I don't know, say house batteries?
Yes, and we've been looking into that. Our batteries need to be replaced once that the total capacity is reduced to 90%. For automotive, usually they go to 80%, even less, right? So what that means is that once that we replace our battery, that used battery, so to speak, is still a significantly high energy density battery, right? And probably a little bit too expensive for a ground storage. So what we're looking at is other mobility applications. So high performance cars and similar vehicles, right? There's also a very interesting approach that we're following is that as the hybrid version won't need such a high energy density battery, we could actually take the batteries from a battery only version, and then once that they've done their job on the battery only aircraft, then move it into a hybrid one. So yes, there will be second uses, but probably ground storage initially, at least that could be like a third life, not a second life for that battery, because again, those systems will still be relatively expensive, sophisticated, and high performing to put them just on the ground to store energy.
Yeah, thanks.
I was going to ask you, David, when you're looking at it's a big scale enterprise that you're running. It's amazing. What are the big areas that are the big investment? What's taking the most what's the big investment sort of part of it?
Yeah. So and look, I'll use this slide, right? And this is just for the next round, right? Where we're basically putting an aircraft in the air, right? So we're developing new technology, right? What you're seeing here are the numbers to build on what we've done to date and develop or mature a couple of components further, but definitely to move towards certification. So the biggest challenge is that you can build relatively quickly, because nothing is too quick here in aviation, relatively quickly a prototype and put it in the air. But that's one thing. And the other thing is get it approved to carry people. Air transport is the safest means of transport in the world, right? When there's an accident, it always creates headlines, but comparatively speaking, it's much safer than a car, right? And that's because the regulation is really strict. For good reason. And what that means is that you need to do, to pass lots of tests. You need to really demonstrate to the regulator that the technology is safe. And that means lots of tests, lots of prototyping, aircraft that you need to fly, all the different components you need to test them on the ground, on the air, and that takes money, right? I showed it briefly, but the total amount of money that we're planning to raise in the next 3 years is $30 million US. And that doesn't include other sources of revenue that we're generating and tax incentives and so on, right? So we're talking about 40 or $50 million of total capital that you need to certify an electric propulsion system that actually is integrated into an existing airframe. That's why I was saying before that if you want to develop something like this from scratch, then we're talking about literally billions. But again, most of that goes into the certification process and testing, developing all those technologies to a very high level of reliability. And that is again required to make the technology as safe as needed to carry people.
Thanks, David. And just a final one. In terms of the battery life, because we've got a question here that talks about if it's only 20 to 30 minutes and for whatever reason the flight doesn't have permission to land, what happens? So what are you thinking of with battery life? How will that get longer over time, do you think?
Yeah, well, first, in terms of issues like that, this is obviously very is regulated, very severely regulated, right? For actually the regulation says that for conventional flights, you need to have 45 minutes of reserve. So what that means is that you need to be able to stay 45 minutes in the air before you land. 45 minutes just waiting or just moving to another airport. In our case, as initially the flights will be really short, if, for instance, you're flying back to your destination, the typical case of a scenic flight or a skydiving operation, you just need 10 minutes, right? And that is European regulation. If you're going from A to B, you made it instead of 10, 20 minutes. But the point is that when I say that we'll be doing short flights, you're carrying energy for that short flight plus another 20 minutes. So literally you could go back to your destination and land there. And obviously we need to demonstrate that we're capable of doing that.
Yeah, fantastic. And then just finally, I know quite a few members of our group are really interested in this topic. Is there anything that that members of our group can do to get involved, that type of thing?
So look, yeah, definitely. I mean, it depends on from what point of view. If you're in the industry, you have any relationship with any operator, any little airline that is providing these kind of services and fly these kind of routes and would be interested in knowing more about us. Yeah, obviously we're trying to attract the interest of as many potential customers as possible. So definitely contact us. And we're obviously raising significant capital. But as I said before, we have a number of angel investors that have been part of our previous rounds. Right now, we have around 80% of our capital raise ready. We're just waiting for the last 20%. So if anybody has any interest in playing a role in there, just let us know. Or any other type of feedback or support that, or just curiosity about what we're doing, more than happy to answer any questions. So you have there, my contact details. So happy to speak with anybody.
Yeah, fantastic, David. Well, thank you so much. That's really fascinating. You're right at the cutting edge of new technology here, which is great. And it's great to be seeing this all coming from Australia too. So good luck, and we'll watch with interest the first flight next year. And thanks for sharing that. And it looks really exciting. So thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me, and thanks for your interest.
Yeah, that's very good.
Thanks, David.
Yeah.
I think I just wanted to, we're going to move on and talk, invite Lisa to talk to us in a minute. I just wanted to make mention, I know most of you will have seen that the first Australian National Climate Risk Assessment was released today. A little bit depressing. I think most people probably aren't surprised, but just as I suppose the context, all the things that we're talking about, I can just really see that the work that David's doing in terms of aviation, it's really important to be taking our emissions out of that sector. And even though Lisa's topic is a different one, it's also super important when we're looking at the widest sort of work that we need to do to improve our climate outlook. So without further ado, welcome Lisa McMurray. Lisa is the Program Development Manager at the Aboriginal Carbon Foundation. We've invited her today to speak about her experience. She attended the 2024 United Nations Biodiversity Conference of the Parties, or COP16 for biodiversity, at the Convention on Biological Diversity in Cali, Colombia last year. And we've invited Lisa because we really wanted to hear about her experience there. But just as a bit of background, the Aboriginal Carbon Foundation aims to achieve economic independence and social and emotional health and well-being for First Nations people through carbon farming and cultural fire credits, blending ancient traditions with modern science. Lisa's co-led NGO collaborative community development initiatives in PNG, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, Fiji, Tonga, Cook Islands, Timor-Leste, India, Malawi, and Australia. And a key focus of her work has been to develop First Nations-led and owned carbon and cultural fire initiatives and nature-based solutions, and at the same time facilitating self-determination and building on strengths in those communities. So, Lisa, thank you very much for joining us, and over to you.
Muted again. Now I need to share my screen.
Great.
So share down here, because I'm switching, I'm on Zoom, so I'm using a different, here we go. And share sound.
Yes.
Okay, let's see. You can't see any of that yet, can you?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, why is that? Okay, I'm talking. Hang on, we'll try again.
There we are. Looks like
Okay,
we're
there
on
we
the right
go.
track.
Okay, we will do from the beginning. Okay, there you go. That's better. Well, thank you, Stephen and Carolyn, for inviting me to come along and talk to professionals who are interested and worried about the impacts of climate change. And I have to also share that Stephen and Caroline and I go way back, because our oldest kids, well, actually my oldest and your youngest too, went to preschool together. So that was a really nice connection that we had going way back, and to have that invitation was lovely to reconnect. But firstly, I also wanted to pay my respects to Gadigal and Wangal countries. These are the countries on which I live and work and play. And this is the Gulayari, which is otherwise known as the Cooks River. And I wasn't sure if people know, but I thought I would promote this amazing book, if you can see it here, which is actually the Sydney language book. So, you know, people often think like, oh, where is it? It's not going to show up on me, maybe. You can get this from the IATSIS website, but, you know, often people think that Gadigal knowledges and Gadigal language is sort of dying out because there are so many other mobs and other non-Indigenous groups living now, what is now Sydney, but that's not the case. And I think by using language is really important to make sure, you know, it's it's the resistance that Indigenous peoples are very much well and thriving in some cases in Australia. And Gadigal, I'm not sure if people know, but Gadigal Kadi means grasses and Gal means people. So Gadigal means people of the grasses. And Guliari, which is otherwise known as Cooks River, is actually the special place of the pelican dreaming. So, and you can get a lot of information from that book around all about Sydney. And something else I just wanted to mention around that, thinking that knowledge is lost. I was down the South Coast a few weeks ago with some Yuin people, and one of the traditional owners down there, Dan Morgan, said, you know, he really gets upset when he hears that people saying that traditional knowledge is lost, because the knowledge actually lives in the landscape. And so when people and landscape are back together, that's when it's activated. So I thought that was a really beautiful thing to mention. Okay, so yes, you said I work with Aboriginal Carbon Foundation. We're a small Aboriginal NGO. I'm a non-Indigenous person, but most of the staff and board are Indigenous people. You know, we have Marcia Langton as our patron, and we've got some pretty hard-hitting, seasoned Indigenous people who have been promoting Indigenous knowledges for a long time. But mostly our work is with communities and with traditional owner groups to access the carbon markets and access the emerging biodiversity markets. But the main methodology we use in carbon farming is the Savannah Fire methodology, and that's what's behind me here. I'm actually in my bedroom, but behind me is actually Central Australia, a Savannah Fire project up near Tennant Creek, and that methodology was born out of Arnhem Land. It's a traditional knowledge. It took 12 years to develop with Charles Darwin University to put the Western science around it. It's an absolutely incredible opportunity for Indigenous people, although more non-Indigenous people use that method than Indigenous people. But basically, by putting in fire at the right time, you mitigate massive wildfires. And in Cape York, in the time that the Savannah burning methodology has been implemented, the mitigations have been reduced by 50%. So, you know, amazing. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what took me to Cali last year. I'm also involved in another program called the Atlantic Fellows. It's a philanthropy program that this very, very rich billionaire, Chuck Feeney, set up. We should introduce him to Dovetail, although actually he passed away, but Atlantic Philanthropy had a lot of money. And he was just this incredible man who wanted to put all his money into redressing inequities around the world. And so he set up these 7 hubs. It's housed out of Oxford Uni, like it's, they've got a lot of prestige around it, but essentially these hubs are 7 hubs around the world in looking at economics and health and racial structures. And I'm involved in the program housed at Melbourne Uni that looks at Indigenous social change. So last year, 35 of us came together from those 7 hubs, and we met in Bogota, and we shared our own experiences. Every one of those 35 people are working in climate change, some sort of climate change. I just I had some notes, dropped my notes. And we spent the week together before we went to Cali, talking about different strategies around planetary health and just transitions, and particularly around decarbonising needs to be delivered in a decolonising way, because so many of the people who are, impacting the worst climate change are not the people who created climate change in the first place. And particularly we see here in Australia with the Torres Straits, we know that islands are already going under, and people are losing their cemeteries, and people are losing their gardens, and the soil is impacted on, and the list goes on and on and on. So we need to be very mindful that Indigenous people and local communities need to be front and centre of those legal and policy frameworks that can drive climate justice. The other thing about being in Bogota or being in Colombia that was really pertinent is that 1 in 8 species are on the brink of extinction. And fortunately, when I wasn't there, we didn't experience the rationing, but there is regular rationing of energy and water, which is not much fun to live through. Anyway, from there, so I had an amazing week in Bogota, and then I went down to Cali, and I've got this cute little video that I thought I would play. It's a good summary of Cali. But what you mentioned, Carolyn, was that yes, the CBD stands for the Convention of Biological Diversity, and COP is the Conference of the Parties. So there's also the Climate COP, and the year before I was at Dubai, which was chalk and cheese to this Cali. This is the biodiversity COP is held every 2 years, whereas the climate COP happens every year. So we're up to 31 of the 30 this year. Yeah, 30 of the Brazilian climate COP, and the next biodiversity COP won't be until next year. Now, I'm not sure how many people have been to COPs, and I can't see hands risen or whatever. So I'm just going to explain some of the things that I've taken away from being to 2 different COPs. But there's very much there are 2 zones. There's the blue zone and the green zone. I mean, is this something, Carolyn, that people would know, or is this interesting to share?
Yes. Yeah, I think so.
Okay,
Yeah.
so the blue zone and the green zone, I would say the blue zone is where all the business happens. So you've got all the government negotiators, you've got everyone progressing the Paris Agreement in the case of the climate COP, or the climate biodiversity framework in the case of the biodiversity COP. So you've got all the governments, you've got the negotiators, you've got private sector, you have NGOs, government, local government, everyone is in the blue zone, but it's where the business gets done. And the other terminology for that is inside. So the inside is the government, and then the inside outside are sort of all the other people who've been lucky enough to get registration and hold a overflow badge, which is what I've had to both of these events. And then the outside's the green zone. And interestingly, at the climate COP, the green zone is very much where all the activists are, the grassroots, people who are really impacted by climate change, who are very much kept out of the blue zone. So, that's some of the criticisms of the climate COP. But this was the other way around. It was very refreshing, because the green zone for me was where all the action was. I went into the blue zone for some of the time. I went into the green zone for some of the time. They're about an hour apart. So, they've both got programs that are running from 9 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock at night. But the green zone was there was just so many people from all around South America doing incredible presentations, incredible work. And so that's why it really was called the COP of the people, or the People's COP. It was very intentional to make it accessible, whereas in other countries, you know, unless you've got your pass, you're pretty much not welcome. And I was there with some other colleagues who are part of what we're involved in at Aboriginal Carbon Foundation, which is a consortium called Indigenous Country Biodiversity Alliance. And that's another thing. But if you want to look that up down the track, you can look that up. But basically, yeah, I'll play this little video and then we can talk a bit more.
Buenos dias. Beautiful day, Kelly. It's my last day, and I'm walking to the Green Zone, where I am talking on a panel showcasing the Indigenous Country Biodiversity Alliance, a consortium of which Aboriginal Carbon Foundation is one of 4 partners. And it's great to be able to share this good news story, because internationally the carbon market's been pretty exploitative of Indigenous people and local communities, and it's really enabled a lot of dodgy practice. So there's a lot of suspicion about emerging biodiversity markets. So it's great to be able to talk about a good news story that's really centering Indigenous knowledges and Indigenous ways of doing things all the way through this program. And great way to finish an amazing COP. This is my first convention for biological diversity COP 16 in Cali, term the People's COP. It's very much that. The Green Zone is just beautiful. The vibe is divine, full of people and their families coming in, particularly in the afternoons and the evenings and concerts. And I'm just showing you a little bit of Cali behind me. This is the Green Zone. Oops, been around so I like to pass out behind me. In there, it was green. And yeah, really sad to be leaving, but excited to continue our great work as always. Okay, bye.
Oh, yeah, I'm always doing little videos, sending them home, you know, sending them to colleagues and stuff. So, but I think that was a good summary. That was my last day, but so it's a little bit back to front. But basically, the key hot topics for this CBD were around progressing the global biodiversity framework that was agreed upon at the previous COP, climate biodiversity COP at Kunming, Montreal. And you've probably heard of that 30-30-30, so conserving 30% of land and 30% of oceans and restoring 30% of degraded ecosystems by 2030. The pledges around the money around that apparently just so well, not what am I trying to say? 200 billion is not even scratching the surface. You know, there's different economic modelling around that suggests maybe 700 billion a year. But the big issue from Indigenous people was getting this Article 8J over the line, which meant a permanent subsidiary committee embedded in this framework for Indigenous people to make sure that Indigenous concerns, Indigenous knowledges, Indigenous ways of doing things were front and centre of this framework, because Indigenous people are managing 80% of the remaining biodiversity in the world. So if you've got Indigenous people who have 80% of the remaining biodiversity that can potentially be sequestering carbon, that can be managed to slow global warming, then really that financing needs to go to that 80% of the people as well. And at the moment, Indigenous people receive less than 1% of finance to manage 80% of the remaining world's biodiversity. So that was very much a hot topic for Indigenous people. This woman, Hindu Umaru Ibrahim, is the current chair. This was her first COP, biodiversity COP of the UN Permanent Forum of Indigenous Issues. You know, she said, like, the time for transformational funding is now. We've got to move beyond this peanuts thing. And this is very much what Indigenous NGOs see, is that normally Indigenous people are an afterthought when it comes to everything, but particularly around land repair here in Australia with carbon markets, with the nature repair market. You know, like organizations, private sector come to us as an NGO all the time wanting to partner with us on something, but the design has already been done. The tender has already been put in. And then it's normally an afterthought to be involving an Indigenous organisation. So, you know, that really needs to change around financing, particularly and I feel like we're actually dovetailed, and there's the pun, quite nicely, I think, with the previous presentation, because these are knowledge systems. So Indigenous knowledges, ancient knowledge systems have the answers. People are still in all these landscapes to get us out of this mess if we're looking at land repair. But like I said before, you know, the financing is just dismal, and also needs to be designed and implemented by Indigenous people, so not that afterthought. I mean, that was a pretty sobering first dot point that Global Environment Facility report came out just before the Cali COP, that no country currently invests more in protecting nature than it does in destroying it. So that was all the backdrop to coming into the COP. And some of the, you know, my takeaways, I feel this is actually a beautiful harvest ceremony that happened every day in the green zone. The local Indigenous people from the Cali region would do this beautiful ceremony. And I think, you know, something that came up time and time again is that the Western view of nature is very much extractive and something to conquer. But for Indigenous people, everyone is connected. Everything is connected. So if we could shift this psyche from just seeing nature as separate and something that we can extract and make money out of, to actually seeing nature and all living things as family and friends and kin that we care for, and we are reciprocating with. So that, you know, I think that's something that I'm trying to really promote about this psyche shift. You know, numerous Indigenous leaders said we need to understand as globally that, like, your flourishing is my flourishing, that no one flourishes until we're all flourishing. And then a little final cute video, because I would be stupid not to be sharing this, because Cali is the home of salsa. So here's a lovely little video to finish on, and then we can have a discussion. And that's it. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Lisa. That was a very interesting snapshot of Cali and of the Biodiversity COP. If anyone's got any questions to add into the chat, feel free to do so. But just while we're waiting for them, yeah, look, I think what you've talked about in terms of nature repair and the need to, I suppose, design with Indigenous people, right? You know, and right from the get-go, so to speak. What do you see, you know, having been to and seen, I suppose, what you saw at COP and with your other experience, and then coming back to Australia, what do you think is the upside? What's the opportunity that we do have in investing in carbon, cultural burning, other nature repair, versus also, you know, the watch outs or the, you know, potential further exploit?
I think that we sell our carbon credits to the private sector, and unfortunately people still want to just buy a little bit of high integrity carbon credits that can be used for ticking the box on CSR, meeting the RAP plan commitments, talking about net zero and climate footprint. So that's what you'll see on the Big Four's website. You'll see all of the great, you know, Indigenous projects that are helping banks offset their carbon footprint. But really what's happening is the majority of that offsetting is happening in unregulated markets for, you know, a pittance of the price. So I think there is a reluctance to pay top dollar. So the carbon credits that we sell are top dollar because they're Indigenous led, they're Indigenous owned, they're delivering on so much more than just carbon emissions. And that's why corporates are really interested in them. But it's still only, you know, we don't have any. There's 38 methodologies in the Australian carbon scheme, but only one of those methodologies is being utilised by Indigenous people because down south there is no cultural fire or southern fire methodology yet. It may come, but you know, so there's still a real conflict, I think, in Western knowledge systems and Indigenous knowledge systems and short-term turnarounds, you know, 2 to 3 year grants. All of this really impacts on being able to develop new biodiversity projects or carbon projects that draw on Indigenous systems. So I think there's sort of the impacts. At these global events, there are many Indigenous people from all around the world, all sharing their knowledges, all pleading basically with Western governments to develop innovative funding schemes that really support Indigenous people because the knowledges are still there. So I think that's very much what's frustrating. And, you know, what we saw with the bushfires in 2019, and this group got set up after that, there are Yuin people all up and down the East Coast who have that fire knowledge. But things like insurance, you know, becomes a preventative for individual fire practitioners to be able to be engaged, to be putting in fire practice around assets. I mean, you know, breaks Indigenous people's hearts when there are bushfires because there's no need for that. So, you know, I think there's still an arrogance around knowledge supremacy. There's definitely biases. So, you know, I mean, look what happened with The Voice. So, you know, we've got a long way to go, really, that shifts seeing Indigenous people as an add-on or basically as not with that knowledge system that can really contribute to the climate calamities.
Thank you. And maybe one final question. I think you said that 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity is managed by Indigenous people, yet 1% of finance funding comes to them. What is that government funding, or is that what when we talk about funding
blended finance, like that's, you know, the funding that's being raised to really roll out all types of initiatives around biodiversity. But again, it normally gets channeled through so many different layers. And so things, and the other thing that happens, like the dodgy practice that you asked about before, is that, so, you know, buyers of carbon credits or buyers of biodiversity certificates globally would like to, and rightfully so, have some verification methodology around them. And there are international standards that do that. But because they're businesses and they're not applying that decolonizing lens, what happens is that people, and you would have seen it like on Four Corners in PNG, you know, there's some really alarming practice where people think they're doing the right things. Well, these companies think they're doing the right things by helping develop projects, but then the people on the ground are getting paid 50 cents to plant trees and someone else is owning the carbon rights because it's registered in someone else's name. So these things happen when you, I guess, don't have Indigenous people's interests front and center. So yeah, there's a long way to go. I mean, there's a lot that's happened in the last couple of years around biodiversity markets and making sure that there are different committees set up around traditional ecological knowledges and lots of really amazing, hard-hitting, you know, long in the tooth Indigenous warriors who are on these bodies, but still, you know, the funding may not, or has not in the past got to where it really needs to be. We'll see what happens through this new market.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I'm sure we could keep talking for another
Well, we
hour.
can when you get back.
But thank you. That was super interesting, I think, for all of us. So such a fascinating session first with David talking about the advances in electrical aviation, and then Lisa talking about COP and the importance of Indigenous, the biodiversity COP and the importance of Indigenous involvement in solutions for biodiversity going forward. So we hope you've enjoyed tonight's session. Our next environment session is on Monday, October the 13th. We really hope you can join us. We've got 2 speakers again then. We've got Jeremy McLeod, who's the founder and design director at Breathe, which is Australia's most awarded sustainable architecture and design firm. And he's also the co-founder of Nightingale Housing. And Nightingale Housing is a not-for-profit delivering homes that are socially, financially and environmentally sustainable. And they believe that homes should be built for people, not for profit. And they're a super interesting model if you've ever seen. They've got developments in Melbourne and in Sydney. And also Natalie Kiriakou. So Natalie's joining us to talk about her new book, which is called Nature's Last Dance, Tales of Wonder in an Age of Extinction. And I don't know if many of you know Natalie Kiriakou, but she was awarded an OAM and also named as a Forbes 30 under 30 for her services to wildlife and environmental conservation in 2018. She was a UN Environment Programme Young Champion of the Earth finalist, and she was the LinkedIn 2022 Top Green Voices and one of Australia's 2022 Top Innovators. She's the founder and chair of My Green World, a board director at the Foundation for National Parks and Wildlife, a director of Care Australia, a W20 delegate, a UNESCO Green Citizens Pathfinder, and she sits on the X Prize Global Brain Trust for Biodiversity and Conservation. So I think that's going to be a really interesting session as well. We can't wait to hear from Jeremy and also from Natalie, and we hope that you can all join us on October the 13th.